This is not good. Where are you, Chris?
You know, I can't really think of a game series that's had as big of a comeback as Resident Evil. I mean, starting with the release of Resident Evil 7, the series has put out excellent entries, one right after the other. And I mean, sure, several of them are remakes, and even one of those wasn't received terribly well.
What the hell?
But before Capcom's return to form with 7, they were putting out some pretty questionable titles.
Jake!
We got Operation Raccoon City, a spin-off about a squad of Umbrella agents sent to dispose of any evidence and survivors, which sounds cool in premise, but it ended up just sort of being a buggy mess that you can't even buy on Steam anymore.
But that's simply not possible.
Why isn't it possible?
It's just not.
Why not, you stupid bastard?
There was also the last mainline entry with Resident Evil 6, which stripped almost every last bit of what made a Resident Evil game, and instead attempted to be part Gears of War and part Call of Duty.
They took it hard. Outcome? Train go boom.
With cover shooting, explosions, and a fucking car chase. It lacked any sort of identity and had no original ideas. It was fucking pathetic.
It's pathetic.
But during this same time period, we actually got one of the best RE games to date, and funny enough, it was one made exclusively for the 3DS. Because, yeah, despite being a mobile version of a Resident Evil game, Revelations had everything you could really ask for in an RE game, and even had some fresh ideas for the franchise like episodic storytelling and raid mode, an arcadey looter-shooter type game. And it's one of the only ones I find myself really returning to regularly, if only to play that raid mode, which really has become one of my favorite game modes in the whole franchise.
That was flawless.
So, alright, let's zip up those wetsuits, but only, like, up to the belly button, and get right into it.
Hey, are you even listening?
We'll find you, Jill. I promise.
So, the general premise of Revelations is that you play as Jill Valentine, searching for her old partner, Chris Redfield, on a mysterious ship called the Queen Zenobia, which has been lost at sea for quite some time. And I think immediately, a ghost ship out on open water is an excellent locale for a Resident Evil game. It's almost a direct parallel to them finding an old abandoned mansion out in the middle of the forest.
What is this? Wow, what a mansion!
But over the course of the game, you'll actually switch between multiple playable protagonists in different places and times, as a full story is slowly unraveled. You'll play as Jill, but then also as Chris, her partner Parker, and another BSAA agent, Keith.
Now you're talking.
And like I said earlier, the game is actually presented as episodes, sort of like a TV show, even going so far as to have cliffhangers and previously on segments between each episode. And this was obviously done to make short mobile play sessions easier, with each episode part being no longer than 20 minutes or so, and some being as short as a few minutes. And while it was done with a 3DS in mind, I actually really like this, even on PC or console. Because, like a lot of people, sometimes I only have, like, half an hour to play something.
That doesn't sound good.
So it's actually really nice to be able to actually feel like I've made progress on a game in such a short amount of time, rather than just sitting and staring at my library, thinking about how I don't have time to get anything done in any of the games I like to play.
You're goddamn right.
And the game itself isn't terribly long either, coming in at about 5 to 6 hours for a first time playthrough. But the thing with Resident Evil games is that they're highly replayable, and it's no different here. There's New Game Plus, a higher difficulty, as well as unlockable weapons and costumes, which is already a lot on top of that extremely replayable raid mode. And that's just to say that there's really a lot of value in Revelations. It might be short, but for people who still like to get their money's worth, I think Revelations delivers.
He's right, you know.
And it's worth mentioning too that despite being a 3DS game, Revelations can look pretty great at times, at least when it comes to how environments look.
Impressive. Very nice.
I mean, the game isn't gonna be pushing your rig to the absolute limits. Textures can be super flat, and character models, no matter how much cleavage they may show, still don't look too hot either. No offense, Chris. But, still, some of the interior environments look pretty excellent, especially the Grand Hall and some of the more darkened corridors that really bring back those Spencer Mansion vibes.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
What is it?
And I think that's really where Revelations exceeds. It really feels like a bit of a direct sequel to, the Resident Evil 1 remake. You don't have that isometric view, but you're still slow jogging through dark, creepy hallways, you're scavenging for green herbs and ammo, you're reading notes left by scientists and people caught up in an outbreak, and you're solving puzzles as well as finding specific keys for specific doors in order to progress. And you'll actually be doing quite a bit of backtracking to get weapons and resources behind previously inaccessible areas. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is that Revelations, despite coming out in an era when Resident Evil was really struggling to find an identity, still manages to be a classic Resident Evil experience.
I understood that reference.
A spin-off title made for the fucking 3DS had more Resident Evil DNA than a mainline title.
He's right, you know.
And I guess it's really no wonder that the director for Revelations would go on to be the director for Resident Evil 7, really jump-starting that new era for the series. And while the exploration is almost exactly like the original two games, the puzzles, unfortunately, just aren't as good. Really, there's just one, which has you sliding these nodes into specific slots to open doors. And originally this was done with that little stylus to take advantage of the second 3DS screen. And luckily these aren't really frustrating to deal with, and you only have to do them a handful of times. But what you are going to be doing a lot of is combat, which thankfully, the combat in Revelations is actually really good. Revelations has that over-the-shoulder camera angle from Resident Evil 4, playing just like how that did, with a few changes. Firstly, you can actually move and shoot, as well as run while reloading, whereas RE4 and 5 had that stop and pop gameplay, making you stand in place while you shoot and reload. You also have access to melee attacks, both in the form of actual weapons, but then also the ability to do a dedicated attack on stunned enemies, kinda like how it worked in RE4 and 5. But unlike those two, there's also a dodge move that, when timed right, allows you to completely avoid attacks. But I could never get it to work consistently, and I've never been able to. Sometimes I can nail it every time in an encounter, but then I'd swear I timed it right only to get absolutely smacked down.
Yeah, I agree.
I also want to mention that specifically on console and PC, you have crosshairs rather than the laser used in 4 and 5. The 3DS version had lasers, and all of the weapon models still have that laser attachment, so why they've omitted that is anyone's guess. Personally, I don't mind the crosshairs, but it would have been nice to, have the option to choose one or the other. I will say that at least the crosshairs look decent, and they're dynamic for each weapon type. And speaking of, there are a surprising amount of firearms to use in the campaign. You start off with just a pistol, but over the game you'll get access to various other pistols, shotguns, assault rifles, sniper rifles, and magnums. And each playable character often have their own loadout and unique melee weapons to use. And while Resident Evil 4 had the merchant to purchase upgrades from, Revelations and its sequel use a unique upgrade system to that series. Over the course of the game, you'll find weapon parts that at these scattered item boxes allow you to customize weapons to suit your playstyle. You can increase damage, fire rate, ammo capacity, as well as add on modifiers like higher crit chances or the ability to charge up shots. And I actually really love this system. I like being able to almost have like a build going. Like, I can pick and choose the weapons that I like to use and dedicate parts to those weapons. But then at any point, I can simply remove those parts and add them to other compatible weapons. It actually feels a bit more flexible than the merchant system where money is a limiting factor and you may be forced to sell a weapon in order to upgrade another. But a combat system is really only as good as the enemies you're using it on, and just like with the guns, there's a surprising amount of variety when it comes to enemies. You have your bog standard zombie looking enemies, but there are several variations. There are ones that have blades for arms that hit harder, ones that can shoot projectiles, and let's not forget the obligatory chainsaw enemy. Then there are some fairly classic enemies, including zombie dogs and even just straight up hunters that can still one-shot you if you aren't careful, just like in the original game. Then there are others that you can encounter only a few times, like this guy who, to be frank, gives you one of the most brutal death animations I've ever seen. I mean, fucking hell, dude. And just like the weapon upgrade system, Revelations has another unique mechanic in the scanner.
What's the reading say? That I'm one sexy mofo, right?
From the jump, you get this hand scanner that allows you to find hidden objects like resources or key items. But then also it can be used to scan enemies. And upon scanning enough to reach a 100% level, you gain an herb to heal with. And I actually really like the scanner. I never found it to be tedious to go room to room, whipping it out in search of resources. It also comes in handy for gaining a healing item, allowing you to stay on the fight longer than you might be able to otherwise. You also use it exactly once to navigate through some lasers towards the end of the game. But I think the developers missed a chance to utilize it in other ways. Like, instead of gaining an herb, the scanner could have worked similar to the camera in BioShock, allowing the player to scan specific enemies to increase the damage done against them when research is complete. Or maybe allow the player to unlock weapon parts that specifically increase damage to that enemy type. And they really missed out on using it to solve any sort of environmental puzzles other than that one laser puzzle. Players could have had to find specific numbers to open a door that were only visible with the scanner, or maybe use it to spot enemies for the AI companion to shoot.
That's a great idea!
So, the story is brief, but offers up replayability and has that classic Resident Evil DNA, and there's some pretty unique mechanics in the scanner and the upgrade system. And that's not to mention too that episodic nature works surprisingly well, with the short levels really lending themselves to adults who are short on time after a long day. But where I think Revelations really killed it is with Raid Mode. Raid Mode is an absolute fucking blast. It has you replaying sections from the campaign, but against leveled opponents. As you play, you'll level up, earn gear like weapons and parts, and unlock new characters. And all of the characters have unique abilities that allow you to play the way that you want to. For example, Jill focuses on machine guns and pistols, while Rachel focuses on shotguns and magnums. There are a ton of weapons to unlock too, as well as upgrades for your ammo and grenade capacity. And there are guns with unique names and properties, like a proper looter shooter. There's also a shop where you can spend currency earned by completing levels and earning medals by completing feats, like not taking damage or playing under the recommended level. You can also sell unwanted weapons and parts, and there are even multiple tiers of difficulty. It just makes for an extremely fun and addictive gameplay loop. And those medals you can earn really incentivize you to replay missions to get a perfect run. And this is still my favorite bonus mode in a Resident Evil game. I love the mercenaries, but the light RPG and looter shooter elements really scratch that part of my brain that keeps me coming back to other games like Borderlands or Diablo. And I think it's a real shame they never tried to make a standalone title similar to Mercenaries 3D, and instead kept trying to push those dog shit multiplayer titles like Umbrella Corps and RE-verse. Or is it reverse? Either way, raid mode is a great time, and I just wish we got more of it outside of this game and Revelations 2. And while I think Revelations is one of the best Resident Evil games to date, with that blend of classic exploration and modern combat, it's still not without its flaws. While I do really like the way it's structured with the episodes, I think that the actual narrative is still a bit hard to follow and just kind of falls flat in the end. I also think the scanner is a really cool idea, it's just kind of underutilized, especially when the game is already a bit light on puzzles. I also want to mention too that at this point, Resident Evil has a really bad record of introducing interesting and likable characters that we just never fucking see again. Carlos was never seen outside of the third game, and Sheva is never seen again outside of her game with Chris. And here they introduced Parker, who I think is genuinely a pretty likable character who we even get to play as. And just like Carlos and Sheva, we simply never see him again. But even then, at least it's fun to see Chris and Jill work together again.
Thanks, Chris.
And even though I personally didn't care for Revelations 2 outside of raid mode, I'd still like to see more of these Revelations games. They've been killing it with all the recent entries, and I still think there's a place for these spin-off titles. Or at the very least, give us some more of the raid mode. I've been hoping every day that somebody creates a mod for RE4 Remake to add it, because that game's movement and combat would be excellent for it, honestly. But look, man, if you haven't played Revelations, by all means, go play it. At the very least, because it's kind of got the sluttiest characters in the series by far. I am looking at you, Chris.
That went well.